My name is Evelyn Marsh. I've cleaned other people's messes for 6 years, but I stopped being invisible the day I found the photo under their bed. No one ever looks a housekeeper in the eye. Not really. They hand you keys, alarm codes, whispered instructions: don't touch the safe. The kids don't need to know we're not home. Leave the wine bottles in the recycling, not the trash. But they never ask your name. They never wonder where you go after you scrub their floors and flush their secrets down the drain. Maybe that's why it took them so long to notice what I was doing. Because from the outside, I was just a woman in latex gloves. But I wasn't always a housekeeper. Once, I had a life, a career, a fiancé, plans. Before everything was taken from me in a single December morning. I was 25 when I lost everything. My fiancé Daniel died in a car crash on his way to pick up a Christmas tree. They said it was icy roads, wrong angle, no one's fault. But after the funeral, I opened his laptop, and what I found, well, that's another story. Let's just say grief didn't kill me, betrayal did. After that, I couldn't stay in our apartment. I quit my job at the interior design firm, moved across the state to a town where no one knew me. I took the first job I could get, cleaning houses for the rich. I told myself it was temporary, but temporary has a way of settling in when you don't know where else to go. The Devlin family hired me 6 months ago. Biggest house on Westmore Drive, 5 bedrooms, 2 staircases, a pool no one used, and cameras everywhere except in the master bedroom. Funny how the rich forget to protect the one place they're most vulnerable. From the beginning, something felt off. Mrs. Devlin, always watching from the shadows. Mr. Devlin, never home before midnight. Their teenage son Nathan angry, twitchy, too quiet for someone with so much. But I didn't ask questions. I cleaned. Until one day, I was changing their sheets and the corner of a photo peeked out from beneath the mattress. It was old, faded, crumpled at the edges. 2 women, laughing, close, too close. One of them was Mrs. Devlin. The other wasn't Mr. Devlin. I should have put it back. I didn't. I slipped it into my bag, finished my shift, and sat in my car for 20 minutes just breathing. That photo felt dangerous, but more than that, it felt alive, like proof that even perfect lives had cracks. And I had found one. That night, I pulled out an old leather journal I hadn't used in years, wrote the date, wrote what I saw. It started as a coping mechanism, but then it became a practice. Every day after cleaning the Devlin's house, I'd write what I observed. July 19th, broken wine glass behind the trash can, clean cut on Mrs. D's finger. July 25th, Nathan's meds changed, new prescription bottle. August 2nd, Mr. Devlin left hotel keycard and jacket, checked name, Riverstone Suites. August 4th, heard muffled yelling in the office, Mrs. D crying, paper shredder running. You'd be surprised how much you can learn just by listening. And I listened better than anyone. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. At first, it was just control. When life had taken everything from me, this gave me structure, truth, order in a world that had stopped making sense. But then something happened that changed everything. They fired Blanca the nanny. No warning, no severance, no explanation. She'd worked for them 5 years, loved those kids like her own, gone overnight. When I asked Mrs. Devlin what happened, she smiled coldly and said, "People forget their place sometimes. We don't tolerate that here." I nodded. Then I went home, opened my journal, and wrote, "People forget their place. So do I." What they didn't know was that I had copies of everything. Photos, voicemails, prescription records, even a security camera blind spot they thought was safe. I had access. You see, I was their housekeeper, but I used to be a systems analyst. Daniel didn't know that I had installed software on his phone before he died. After what he did, I promised myself I'd never be blind again. So what does a woman like me do with secrets? She waits, she watches, and then, when the timing is right, she moves. I'll tell you what I did with those files. How I turned whispers into leverage. How I gave Blanca back her dignity. How I made the Devlins beg me to keep their world from collapsing. But first, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been treated like furniture? Like you were too small to matter until they realized you remembered everything? Tell me in the comments. Because maybe you're not as invisible as they think. After what Daniel did, I promised myself I'd never be blind again. So I watched, I waited, and I collected secrets, documents, patterns. Every lie they told became a page in my ledger. I didn't know what I would do with it all yet, but I knew the time would come. Because power doesn't vanish, it transfers. And I was no longer afraid to hold it. There was a particular Thursday I remember, late September. Mrs. Devlin asked me to stay late because they were hosting some political dinner. Men in suits, women in pearls. The kind of gathering where people toast to the future while gutting the present behind closed doors. I served champagne, smiled, moved like a ghost through their gold-plated hypocrisy. And I listened. You'll clear that zoning deal, right? What's a little donation between friends? The reporter doesn't have proof. Yet, each word, another brick in their crumbling facade. Later that night, as I cleaned the wine-stained linens, I found an envelope behind the bar. Inside, a check, $500,000. Signed, undated, no recipient, bribery insurance. And suddenly, I saw it all. Their fear, their calculations, their rot. I used to believe that justice came from the courts. Now I know it comes from knowing what people fear, losing most, and standing close enough to hold it. I wasn't Evelyn the grieving Fiancee anymore. I wasn't Evelyn the quiet housekeeper. I was Evelyn Marsh, the one they should have never ignored. And this time, when I wrote in my journal, I added something new, objective. Take back control, method, precision, not noise. Because silence, used well, is never empty. It's loaded. Have you ever held someone's secret and realized they'd be nothing without your silence? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who else has lived like wallpaper and finally cracked the paint. I always knew the Devlins were hiding something, but the first time I saw them truly scared, it wasn't about what they did. It was about what I knew. The week after Blanca was fired, the house changed. Tension hung in the air like dust that wouldn't settle. Mrs. Devlin started double-locking the bedroom door. Mr. Devlin stayed out later than usual, came home smelling of tobacco and something more expensive than perfume. And Nathan, their teenage son, stopped speaking to anyone, except me. It started small. I was vacuuming the upstairs hallway. He opened his bedroom door just enough to whisper. They didn't even tell her goodbye. I turned off the vacuum. Blanca? I asked. He nodded, eyes hollow. She cried in the laundry room for an hour after they told her to leave. No one said anything, not even my mom. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only honest thing I could. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but didn't close the door. She said rich people are the loneliest liars. I didn't get it. I do now. That night, I added a new section to my journal, Nathan. Observations: 17 years old, isolated. Possibly over-medicated, strong emotional bond with Blanca, distrustful of parents, watches closely. He was like me, not truly inside the family, but close enough to see where it was breaking. And it was breaking. The next day, something strange happened. Mrs. Devlin handed me a new checklist written by hand, unlike her usual typed ones. As I scanned the list, I noticed something odd. At the bottom, in tiny pencil, basement door sticks. Be discreet. Basement? In 6 months, I'd never been asked to clean anything down there. Curious, I waited until they left for their pilots and golf routines. Nathan was upstairs, headphones on. I went to the basement. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Old paper, damp wood, and something sharp like burnt plastic. The second thing, silence. Not even the hum of the house reached this far. I turned on the light. The room was enormous. Unfinished concrete floors, metal shelves lining the walls, boxes, dozens of them. I opened one, bank files, another, tax documents, and then a black binder marked Foundation, Donors 2017 to 2022. Inside, I saw it. Names, amounts, some crossed out, some circled, a few highlighted in red with notes like, clean, push through, too risky, redirect, no more contact. It wasn't a foundation. It was a front. A fake charity they used to move money. Money that didn't belong to them. Suddenly, I understood why Mrs. Devlin wrote be discreet. This wasn't about cleaning. It was about control. About trust. Or fear. Maybe both. When I closed the binder, I noticed something wedged between the boxes. A stack of old employee files. Blanca's was on top. Termination letter, inappropriate familiarity with child, signed by both Devlins. I felt cold. I knew Blanca. She was soft-spoken, tender, protective of Nathan. Whatever that letter claimed, it wasn't the truth. It was insurance, a smear, a future defense, in case she ever decided to talk. And suddenly, I realized so many people like Blanca probably had files like this. Proof? No, but power? Yes. Back in my car, I stared at the steering wheel for a long time. I could leave, quit, pretend none of this mattered. But something inside me was done pretending. Maybe it was Daniel. Maybe it was Blanca. Maybe it was every person who'd ever been fired, silenced, crushed by people who lived in big houses and slept on other people's silence. Either way, I knew what I had to do. That night, I scanned the binder, saved digital copies in 2 separate drives, printed hard copies, and stored them in my own fireproof box. I wasn't just writing things down anymore. I was building something. 2 days later, I called Blanca. She was surprised, guarded. Why are you calling me? I told her I found her file. I told her I didn't believe a word of it. And I asked her softly, would you be willing to tell me what really happened? There was a long pause, then a breath. I trusted them. I thought I mattered. But the moment I asked questions, I became disposable. I asked what kind of questions. She hesitated. I saw an envelope once, from someone named Montreal Associates. It wasn't addressed to them, but it had their name inside. I asked Mrs. Devlin why. Next week, I was gone. I wrote it down. Another thread. I looked it up later. Montreal Associates was a PR cleanup firm. They were hired by politicians, athletes, and once, a man accused of international fraud. That's when the plan started forming. For the first time in years, I felt awake, sharp, precise, not angry, ready. I returned to work the next day, smiling like nothing changed. Cleaned the kitchen, folded the towels, listened to their conversations, took nothing, but remembered everything. The first crack had formed. Now, I was just waiting for pressure. Because when people like the Devlins fall, they don't shatter, they implode. And I was going to be there to feel the heat. Have you ever seen behind the mask and realized the people in power were weaker than they pretended to be? Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about what it feels like to finally see clearly. There's something intoxicating about knowing more than the people who think they own the room, especially when they're used to silence being a sign of stupidity. But I wasn't silent because I was stupid. I was silent because I was studying. And now, I was ready to speak. Not out loud, not yet, but in other ways. The Devlins still thought I was the same quiet housekeeper, that I folded their secrets into sheets and swept them under their rugs, that I looked away when I saw too much, that I didn't know what Montreal Associates did. They thought I didn't notice when Mr. Devlin changed his passwords every Monday morning, or when Mrs. Devlin started labeling her medication bottles as vitamins. They thought Nathan's silence meant he was obedient, not broken. But I knew everything. And now, I was going to make sure they knew I knew. I started small, a detail here, a whisper there. The first thing I did was leave the photo. You remember the one I found Mrs. Devlin with the other woman? I placed it exactly where I found it. Except this time, it was on top of the bed, not under, not buried, staring them in the face. I watched Mrs. Devlin's reaction through the hallway mirror. She found it around noon, frozen in place, no screaming, no calling for me, just silence. But her hands were trembling. She folded the photo, slipped it into her pocket, didn't mention it all day, but she started locking the bedroom door again, this time from the inside. A few days later, I accidentally left a cleaning rag in Mr. Devlin's office, under his desk, next to a drawer labeled Tax Records Q1 Q2. It wasn't open, but I made sure to reposition the books around it just slightly before I left. He noticed. The next day, that drawer had a new lock. He didn't say a word to me, but I caught him glancing over his shoulder 3 times while he poured his scotch that night. That's the thing about powerful people. They're never afraid when they know they're in control. They're only afraid when they're not sure who else is playing. And I had just stepped onto the board. Meanwhile, I kept gathering documents, voice recordings, little fragments that didn't seem like much on their own, but together, they painted a picture of a family living on borrowed time. The charity fraud, the hush money, the under-the-table donations to that real estate developer who'd suddenly stopped returning their calls. I even found a post-it note crumpled in the trash. Call Sandra Ray. Safe house. A safe house? Who needed a safe house in the suburbs? Unless, it was around this time Nathan started asking questions. Why are you still here? He asked me one day while I cleaned the fireplace. I looked at him and smiled. Because someone needs to be. He didn't press, but his eyes lingered on mine like he wanted to. That night, I got a message from Blanca. Just one sentence. Whatever you're planning, be careful. They don't forgive. I stared at the screen. They don't forgive. What a fragile threat coming from people who pretended they had nothing to hide. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. Because the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't just a witness. I was the last honest person in that house. Then came the dinner party. They had guests, the kind with perfect teeth, fake laughs, and mutual secrets. As usual, I served drinks, hovered in the background, invisible, until one guest, a man in a pale gray suit, paused while I poured his wine. "Have we met before?" he asked, squinting slightly. Mrs. Devlin stiffened. "No, she's new," she said quickly. But I smiled politely and said, "I'm just the housekeeper. I doubt I'm memorable." His eyes narrowed. Funny, I never forget a face, especially one that's seen things. He wasn't wrong, and that told me something very important. They weren't just hiding from Mama, they were hiding from each other. Later that evening, while clearing dishes, I overheard something that stopped me cold. "She knows," Mr. Devlin hissed in the kitchen. "I don't know how, but she does, Mrs. Devlin. Then we pay her off. She won't take it. Then we get ahead of it." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Devlin said something I'll never forget. "You don't understand. She's not doing this for money. She's doing it for justice. And justice people are always the most dangerous." I went home that night and wrote in my journal, Phase 1 complete. They no longer trust their own silence. I smiled, because they were right. I didn't want their money. I wanted the truth to have weight again. And soon, it would. Have you ever had something taken from you and realized the only way to heal was to make them feel the same emptiness? Tell me in the comments. Because this story isn't just mine anymore. It's for anyone who's been underestimated. Until it was too late. It was never about exposing them all at once. People like the Devlins don't crumble from a single blow. They erode slowly when you make them doubt what's real and who's watching. And that's exactly what I had started. They were unraveling. I could see it in the way Mr. Devlin lit his cigars too quickly now. The way Mrs. Devlin checked her reflection 3 times before anyone arrived. But they still thought they could manage it. Manage me. The first sign they were trying to push back came on a Monday morning. I arrived to find a new woman in the house. Younger, flashier, blonde ponytail, expensive nails, perfect posture. "I'm Ashley," she said with a bright, artificial smile. "They brought me in to help with deep cleaning." Deep cleaning? That was never mentioned. She talked too much, asked too many questions. About me, how long I'd been here, if I had keys, whether I liked working for the Devlins. She wasn't cleaning. She was spying. I smiled politely, handed her a mop, and said, "Then clean." She lasted 2 days. On the 3rd, she didn't come back. Guess she didn't find what they were hoping for. Then came the envelope. No return address. Slipped under my apartment door. Inside, $5,000 in crisp, new bills. And a note. "This could be the start of something better. All you have to do is walk away." No signature. No threats. Just suggestion. I stared at it for a long time. Then I lit a match and watched it burn, bill by bill, in my kitchen sink. Not because I had money, but because I had resolve. They still didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rectifying an imbalance. And that's something you don't bribe away. That same night, I mailed an anonymous envelope to a journalist at the Westmore Observer. Inside, a copy of one of the Devlins' fake donor letters, signed, dated, with a matching transaction from a shell company. No name, no explanation, just proof. I didn't want a story published. Not yet. I just wanted them to know. Someone had it. Let them feel the heat. Let them panic. Let them spin. The next morning, Mr. Devlin didn't go to work. He spent 4 hours in his office. Door locked. Mrs. Devlin was pacing the kitchen when I arrived. "Do you believe in loyalty, Evelyn?" she asked out of nowhere. I wiped the counter slowly. "To what, ma'am?" Her voice was soft, dangerous. "To the hands that feed you." I met her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Depends what's on the plate." She didn't speak again for the rest of the day. But later that night, I found my cleaning supplies rearranged. My closet open, my notebooks disturbed. They were looking for something. Too late. The files weren't in the house anymore. They were locked away off-site, password protected, redundant backups, legal names removed. They thought I was a housekeeper. I was never just that. Nathan approached me that Friday. He looked tired, hollowed out. They're fighting again, he whispered. But this time it's about you. I paused. What are they saying? He hesitated. They think you're going to ruin us. He looked scared. Not for them. For me. They're talking about lawyers. About private investigators. About options. I crouched down, lowered my voice. Listen to me, Nathan. Whatever happens, you are not responsible for any of this. Do you understand? He nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. I hope you destroy them. And then he walked away. That night, I made a choice. No more warnings. No more signals. The next move would be public. On Sunday morning, I scheduled a timed email to 3 reporters, 1 financial crimes analyst, and a former Devlin associate I found through a background check. The subject line was simple: the truth you missed. Attachments, 4 redacted documents. No names, but enough data to raise serious questions. I gave it 72 hours. A soft deadline. A fuse. If the Devlins didn't act with integrity by then, I would light the match. But on Monday, something happened I didn't expect. They called the agency, the one that had assigned me to them almost a year ago, and they tried to terminate me. No reason given, just a quiet request to replace Evelyn immediately. But the agency director? Her name's Carla, and I've helped Carla out more than once. So she called me before doing anything. You okay? She asked. Because this doesn't sound like a standard removal. I'm fine, I said. Better than ever. Do nothing. She laughed. Got it. Consider you still assigned until further notice. And just like that, their little dismissal plan failed. Another crack. Another shift in control. They had underestimated me again. On Tuesday, Mr. Devlin left for an urgent trip, only. He never got on the plane. I know because I had eyes on the airport log and ears in the office of a car rental associate. He wasn't traveling. He was hiding. They were falling, not loudly, but inevitably. And I was right where I needed to be. Have you ever warned someone with kindness only for them to spit in your face because they thought you were powerless? Let me know in the comments. Because sometimes, the softest voice is the last one they ever hear before it all comes crashing down. They always thought their secrets were safe inside those walls. Imported wood, custom finishes, surveillance everywhere except where it really mattered. But they forgot one thing. I was part of the walls too. And on the day they cracked, it didn't begin with a scream. It began with a whisper, one that echoed too far to catch. It started with a small headline in the Westmore Observer Finance section. But everyone in Westmore who'd ever attended one of those polished Devlin Foundation galas, they knew exactly who the article was about. Mrs. Devlin read it over breakfast. I watched from the corner of the dining room, pretending to wipe crumbs that weren't there. She stared at her phone too long, her hands clenched. Then, without a word, she stood up and walked out. The phone was still buzzing with notifications. 10 minutes later, I heard yelling from the study. How did this get out? She screamed. You said everything was under control. Mr. Devlin's voice was sharp, cold. No one's named. We'll issue a statement. Deflect. Reframe. But she wasn't convinced anymore. I could hear it in the shake of her breath. People are going to talk. You know they will. The neighbors. The school board. Nathan's friends' parents. That was her real fear. Not jail. Not justice. Just being seen for who they were. Nathan stood at the top of the stairs, silent, watching. When I passed him later in the hallway, I said nothing, but he nodded at me just once, like he finally understood. That afternoon, they started purging files, old ledgers, papers shredded into confetti piles, a half-burned hard drive left melting in the trash bin. Desperation isn't loud. It's frantic, sloppy, illogical. The house felt like it was vibrating under the weight of denial. Still, no one said my name, not yet, but I knew it was coming, so I gave them something else to chew on. That night, I posted again, this time, on a verified whistleblower thread used by former nonprofit employees. Not documents, not direct accusations, just context, enough to stir curiosity, enough to invite others in. And someone did respond. An old board member, anonymous, but precise, saw too much. Left quietly in 2019. You're not alone. That sentence hit like a lightning bolt, because I wasn't alone. The next day, a second article dropped. Former staff speak out. Financial irregularities and culture of fear inside prominent Westmore charity. Now it was public. Now the cracks weren't invisible anymore. The Devlins weren't asking who. They were asking, how much did she get? What does she have? Can it be stopped? I arrived at the house early. The gate was open. The lawn was littered with torn paper and soggy printer ink, like someone had tried to drown the evidence but didn't know where to begin. Inside, Mrs. Devlin sat at the kitchen island. No coffee, just a steaming teacup, untouched. A box sat beside her. "Evelyn," she said, her voice paper thin, "sit down." I didn't, but I listened. "I don't know who you really are, but I know you were watching. I know, you were right too." Her eyes didn't shine like before. The light had gone. She looked smaller, more human. I let things happen. I stayed quiet. I thought it would all wash over. She placed her hand on the box. "But silence doesn't save you. It just delays the collapse." Then she slid the box toward me. Inside, flash drives, old phone recordings, one worn notebook with meeting notes from 2018. The name Montrell Associates appeared 7 times, so did at least 3 names I hadn't encountered before. It was her confession, not out of guilt, out of fear, because she finally understood the walls were no longer mute. They remembered everything. That night, I scanned every page, sorted files by priority, built 3 new timelines: scandal exposure, legal vulnerability, and PR pressure. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was architecture, collapse on schedule. Later, Carla, the agency manager who first placed me with the Devlins, called. "They terminated your placement." I smiled. "Of course they did. Want me to file anything official?" "No," I said. "They just took themselves off the board. That's enough." She laughed. "You know, you could have told me who you really were. Would it have made a difference?" "No, but I'd have watched the show a lot sooner." At a M, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Voicemail. "You don't understand what you've done," Mr. Devlin's voice growled. "If you think the truth saves anyone, you're naive. It burns everyone, including you." I listened to it twice, then saved it, labeled, "Final warning," because this was no longer about what he thought. This was about what I was finally becoming. Have you ever lived so long in someone else's shadow that when you finally stepped into the light, they screamed like it burned them? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. It walks through the service entrance and leaves the front door wide open. The day they tried to erase me, they finally proved who I was becoming. Not a worker, not a witness, not a problem to solve. I was now the question they couldn't answer. And nothing terrifies powerful people more than a silence they can't label. I was officially terminated from the Devlin estate. No goodbye, no explanation, just a generic agency message and a locked gate the next morning. But that didn't stop me, because they didn't just fire an employee. They set free the one person who still remembered everything. The media was swirling now. Financial fraud, foundation abuse, whistleblower tips from multiple sources, and in every article, one phrase kept appearing. An anonymous staff member believed to be the key source. That was me. But my name? Nowhere. Because I hadn't given it. Not fully. Not yet. People started reaching out. Old co-workers, former housekeepers. One woman who used to work as the Devlin's driver back in 2016. She told me how Mr. Devlin once made her circle the block while he met with a woman not his wife. How he later paid her to stay quiet. She sent me the signed NDA. I sent her a thank you and legal resources. People were waking up, and they were reaching for me. The woman with no name, but all the proof. Then came the email. Subject line: "We know who you are." No body text, just a photo. It was me, from behind, taken outside my apartment building. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I realized I wasn't invisible anymore. And if they were willing to watch me, then they knew exactly what I was capable of. So I changed strategy. No more anonymity. I sent a message directly to the Observer's editor. Attached: my name, my resume, my files, every job, every document, and one sentence: "I'm not hiding anymore. Let the walls say my name, Evelyn Marsh." The next article came 3 days later. Front page, headline bold and final: "How one woman's silence brought down Westmore's elite, the Evelyn Marsh story." I didn't even know they were publishing it. I read it from a cafe window on a quiet Thursday morning. Alone, black coffee in hand, no makeup, no armor, just truth. The article went viral, not because I screamed, but because I never had to. People shared it with comments like, How did no one notice her? She played chess while they were playing poker. I've never rooted for anyone this hard in my life. And the most painful one, she reminds me of me. That one? I cried when I read it. Then came the phone calls, producers, authors, advocacy groups. Everyone wanted a piece of the housekeeper turned whistleblower, but I didn't respond. Because I wasn't a product. I wasn't a brand. I was a woman who lived too long in silence. And I still hadn't said everything I needed to say. A few nights later, I visited Blanca. She opened the door and pulled me into a hug before I could speak. We sat in her kitchen, no cameras, no noise, just two women who'd been burned by the same fire, but survived it differently. You changed everything, she said. I didn't mean to, but you did anyway, and that's when I understood. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't speak up. It's survive long enough that they can't ignore you anymore. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside, you don't know me, but I used to clean their pool. Once I saw something. You gave me courage. Thank you for breaking the rules they wrote. It didn't have a signature, but it didn't need one, because now I was the name they whispered behind doors, the name they never said aloud, because to say it would be to admit they lost. Have you ever been the question no one dared to answer because the answer meant they'd have to face what they did to you? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes, you don't need revenge. You just need them to say your name and choke on it. I never raised my voice, never slammed a door, never threatened a soul, but I watched an empire fall. And I built that collapse the same way they built their power, quietly, patiently, one choice at a time. People ask me now, how did you do it? How does someone like you take down people like them? And I just smile, because they still think it was an accident, a lucky break, a woman at the right place at the right time. No, plan this, not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Because when you've been forced to clean around the filth long enough, you eventually start studying how the structure rots from the inside. The first move was observation. You can't fight what you don't understand. So I studied them. Every argument, every misplaced receipt, every lie they told their guests while I stood just 10 feet away, invisible. I wrote it all down, not in a notebook, those can be found, in emails to myself, encrypted, hidden under code names, filed under names like Tuesday Laundry and Dog Food Inventory. They never checked. They never even suspected I had a laptop, because people like them don't believe you own anything worth hiding. The second move was duplication. I didn't need all the documents, just copies. Every folder I touched, I scanned. Every phone call I overheard, I recorded keywords. I knew where the real files were kept: locked cabinet, left drawer, Devlin's office. He changed the passcode every week. I changed my listening angle every week. They thought I was deaf, but I heard everything. The third move was triangulation. Secrets are only powerful when kept in one place. I gave copies to people who didn't know each other. One drive went to Carla, my agency contact. One went to a lawyer I never met in person. One was uploaded to a private cloud, accessible only through a dead drop password hidden in an online recipe blog I controlled. Another was printed, taped behind a thrift store painting I donated under a fake name. Why? Because I didn't want leverage. I wanted survival insurance. If I disappeared, the story wouldn't. It would multiply. The fourth move was patience. That was the hardest part. Staying silent while Mr. Devlin berated a young intern in front of his children. Staying composed while Mrs. Devlin fired a gardener for tracking in dirt. Staying present while Nathan cried himself to sleep 3 rooms away. I wanted to scream, but that would have ruined everything. So I smiled, cleaned, and waited. Because sometimes waiting is the most violent thing you can do to people who expect you to break. The final move? Release. Not all at once. Not with fireworks. Just a whisper. One reporter. One folder. One proof. The dominoes fell because they were never glued down. All I did was breathe near them. You want to know how I burned it down? I didn't strike a match. I removed the oxygen. I took away their illusion that no one saw. I dismantled their confidence that they were untouchable. And when the story broke, when the headlines came, they weren't just surprised. They were paralyzed. Because the person they never took seriously was the only one who knew where the weak points were. You know what's ironic? They built their lives on image, but they never imagined anyone would be watching them from the floor. While they stood on marble staircases, I memorized the cracks. While they hosted charity dinners, I cataloged the receipts. While they lied to the world, I made sure the truth had teeth. Now, their accounts are frozen. Investigations have started. And Mrs. Devlin's name is no longer followed by applause, but by questions. They'll blame each other. They'll hire PR firms. They'll retreat into silence. But they'll never reclaim what they lost. Because it wasn't just money. It was untouchability. And that's the one thing you never get back once the walls speak your name. Have you ever destroyed someone without ever touching them just by refusing to play along? Tell me in the comments. Because this wasn't a breakdown. This was a blueprint, and I built it in silence. People think silence is something you're born with, like being shy, or weak, or submissive. But my silence wasn't born. It was built, brick by brick, pain by pain. And before it became my weapon, it was my only shield. Long before the Devlins, before the headlines, before people called me the ghost that brought down a kingdom. I was just a girl trying to survive in a house where survival meant being quiet. My mother wasn't cruel. She was distracted, overworked, unreachable. My father wasn't violent. He was missing. Even when he was there, he was gone. He used to leave for business trips that lasted a weekend. Then they became weeks. Then, one day, he just didn't come back. No note, no closure, just silence. So my mother turned inward, not with grief but with ritual. Vacuuming, cleaning blinds that weren't dirty, rearranging spice racks alphabetically. That was her version of coping. Mine? I disappeared without leaving the house. I learned very early that noise made people uncomfortable. Tears, opinions, needs. They got you scolded, dismissed, or worse, ignored. So I taught myself to shrink. When I got bullied in school, I laughed it off. When I aced a test, I tucked it into my bag quietly. When I won a district art contest at 13, I didn't even tell my mom. She would have just asked if I'd finished my homework. So I stopped expecting to be seen. And I started seeing everything. By 17, I could read a room in seconds. Who was lying? Who was posturing? Who was seconds from falling apart? They called it emotional intelligence in my psychology class. But for me, it was survival. And it became instinct. Then came Daniel, my first love. Or so I thought. He saw me, at least it felt that way. He told me I was mysterious. I thought that meant I was special. Turns out it meant I was easy to manipulate. He liked that I didn't fight back, didn't question him, didn't challenge his absences. Until I opened his laptop and found a wedding registry with someone else's name on it. He wasn't cheating. He was engaged. I was the secret. And the worst part, I didn't even scream. I didn't cry. I packed my things, left my dorm, changed my number, and learned something I've never forgotten. When you leave without a sound, you become the part of their story they can't rewrite. Years later, when I started working in the Devlin's house, I didn't walk in with a mission. I walked in running from my own noise. The silence was comforting at first. No one asked about me. No one cared who I had been. They just wanted their floors clean, their secrets safe. It felt like peace, but it wasn't. It was familiar. And familiarity is dangerous when it looks like comfort. The Devlins reminded me of my past in all the worst ways. Powerful, but careless. Wealthy, but hollow. Loud, but afraid of real voices. They didn't notice me. And that's when I realized they were exactly the kind of people who'd never imagine a housekeeper could end them. So I didn't fight them. I studied them. I turned every room into a classroom, every errand into a lesson, every offhand comment into ammunition. And I waited, not because I was patient, but because I knew the loudest fall comes after the longest silence. People always say, I could never stay quiet like you. I want to tell them it was never quiet in my head. It was chaos. It was the sound of every time I was interrupted, every time I was overlooked, every time someone else took credit for something I stayed up all night perfecting. That noise, I turned it into architecture. I carved it into control. And then, one day, I let it speak. Not for vengeance, but for balance. There was one moment I've never told anyone about. One night, in the Devlin's library, I found an old diary. It belonged to Mr. Devlin's mother. Inside was a single quote that she'd written again and again across different pages. Control the silence, and you control the story. That sentence haunted me. Because she was right, but not the way she meant. She used it to bury things. I used it to expose them. The silence didn't save me. I saved myself through it, by turning it into discipline, into memory, into proof. Silence was never absence. It was strategy. It was structure. And eventually, it became truth. Now, people write about me in articles. They podcast about me. They use my name in boardrooms as a cautionary tale. They say things like, she dismantled them with grace. She weaponized observation. She was a master of quiet resistance. But they weren't there the nights I wanted to scream. When I sat in my apartment and wondered if I was insane for not just quitting. They weren't there when I doubted myself. When I nearly deleted the files. When I wondered if people like them really did win every time. They weren't there when I fought the urge to become like them. Cold, cruel, loud. I didn't fight them with volume. I fought them by staying me. Fully, completely, undeniably. Have you ever survived something quietly and only years later realized that silence was your sharpest blade? Tell me in the comments. Because if you've ever been dismissed for not shouting, you already know. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to last longer than the lie. I didn't want to be a hero. Heroes are polished, edited, swallowed by narrative. They're celebrated one day, turned into clickbait the next. I never wanted applause. I didn't need the spotlight. All I ever wanted was quiet. A kind of quiet I could finally own. So when the world started asking who I was, I didn't give them a story. I gave them silence. And I walked away. Let them remember me wrong. Let them say I was cold, calculated. Let them guess what broke me, who I lost, what I wanted. Let them fill in the blanks with drama. Because the truth isn't beautiful enough for them. It's subtle, slow, cumulative. And they don't want subtle. They want spectacle. So I let them create one. When the final article was published, the headline read, "The woman who watched the house burn and never blinked." It was flattering, poetic, even, but wrong. I didn't watch it burn. I walked away before the first match was struck. Because the real destruction didn't happen in the flames. It happened in their fear. Their scramble to protect a legacy built on rot. Their desperate attempts to patch what I had already cracked. And I didn't need to be there to enjoy the collapse. I'd already moved on. The Devlins vanished. The foundation dissolved. The board disbanded. 3 lawsuits ongoing. Nathan's name never made the press my final act of protection. I saw a blurry photo of Mrs. Devlin in a tabloid 3 months later. Sunglasses, head down, carrying a grocery bag like she had never eaten caviar in her life. And Mr. Devlin, he tried to start over, under a new name. But the internet never forgets. And neither do victims. The first Google result now, my story, page after page. Not because I was loud, but because I was right. I got offers, of course. A documentary team from New York. A book ghostwriter who said, "We'll make you the Aaron Brockovich of housekeepers." A speaker's bureau that dangled $10,000 per event. I didn't even answer most of them. Because if I said yes to one, I'd have to say yes to everything. And I was done performing. My silence had done enough. Now it was time to let others make noise. I moved, not out of fear, out of design. New apartment, new rhythm, same name. But you'd have to dig hard to find it. I changed jobs to sort of. Now, I consult. Not in the flashy corporate way. I sit quietly in rooms people think are safe. Observe meetings, policies, dynamics. Then I tell them what no one else will say out loud. Your people are terrified of you. You're building a machine that chews through empathy. You've silenced truth so well, it started turning into resentment. And they listen. Because somewhere deep inside, they're afraid of another Evelyn Marsh. They should be. Sometimes I pass by people whispering, in coffee shops, on buses, in bookstores. I hear phrases like, "She's the one who took down the Devlins, right? I heard she was a lawyer in disguise." No, she used to work in the CIA. And I don't correct them. I don't even stop walking. Because letting them be wrong is my final grace. When people build myths about you, they reveal more about themselves than they ever do about you. One day, I found a painting in a downtown alley. It showed a crumbling mansion on a cliff and a woman standing far in the distance, back turned, coat blowing in the wind. At the bottom, someone had written in black ink, "Some ghosts don't haunt, they rebuild." That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. I heard from Blanca recently. She opened a daycare, a small one, affordable, kind. She named it Second House. When I asked why, she said, "Because the first one burned." We didn't talk about the Devlins. We didn't need to. Some silence lives between survivors like shared breath. Let them remember me wrong. Let them say I walked away cold. Let them say I overreacted. Let them say it wasn't my place. Because the truth is, I didn't burn their house down. I just refused to hold the hose while they set the fire. And once I stopped helping, everything they built collapsed under its own weight. Because sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you don't return for the applause. You just leave and let the silence echo without you. They say after the storm comes silence, but no one tells you how loud that silence is when all you can hear is what you didn't say. The Devlins were gone. The articles faded. The phone stopped buzzing. And one morning, I woke up and realized I didn't know what to do next. There was no list to follow, no threat to monitor, no files to catalog, just me, in a quiet apartment, and a name everyone suddenly knew, but no one could actually touch. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel brave. I felt empty, because justice doesn't come with confetti. It comes with dust. Devlin Estate, still standing, hollowed out. There was a new security sign in the yard, as if locks could stop the rot that had already seeped into the walls. The lights were off, the gate chained shut, but the memories still flickered behind every shuttered window. I didn't cry, but I stood there for a long time, and I whispered not to them, but to the house. I didn't destroy you. You did that yourself. I just gave you a mirror. Then I turned and left without looking back. In the weeks after, I got letters, some angry, some pleading. A PR agency offered to reframe my story, make it about redemption instead of dismantlement. A publisher said I'd be perfect for a memoir deal, as if they could wrap my life in a paperback and put a bow on it. Even a politician's assistant reached out. A quiet fighter like you would be powerful in our education reform campaign. They all wanted my voice. Not because they cared about what I said, but because it made them feel good to echo something dangerous at a safe distance. So I told them the only truth I had left. I didn't fight for followers. I fought for the people who never got to speak at all. I didn't reply to any of them. Blanca reached out. We met at the same cafe we'd always passed but never entered. She looked lighter, calmer. She had a new job, a small daycare with 3 employees and 13 kids. She named it Second House. You get it, right? She asked. I nodded, because we both knew the first house, the Devlin house, wasn't a home. It was a lesson. She asked how I was doing, and I told her the truth. I don't know who I am when I'm not fighting anymore. She took my hand and said, then you get to choose. You get to build, not react, not defend, just build. That night, I opened the journal again. Not the encrypted files, not the evidence folders, just the journal. The one I started the day I found the photo under the bed. I flipped back to the very first page. July 3rd. Broken wine glass behind trash can. Blood drop on tile. It felt like someone else had written it. A ghost version of me. Quiet, calculating, wounded. I turned the page. And another. Lines of pain. Breadcrumbs of betrayal. Secrets I carried like they were oxygen. But as I read, something strange happened. I stopped feeling angry. I started feeling grateful. Because even when I had no voice, I gave myself one in those pages. And now, maybe it was time to stop writing about other people's chaos and start documenting my own clarity. I didn't go back to cleaning, but I didn't go forward into the spotlight either. I chose a third road, a quieter one. I started consulting, not officially, not with a title, but when someone whispered, "There's something off in our office," they knew who to call. I'd come in, observe, ask quiet questions, and leave behind a single sheet of recommendations. No name, no signature, just truth. Because not everyone deserves your history. Some people only deserve the warning. A few months later, Carla from the agency emailed me. Subject line, "You might want to see this." Attached was a hiring notice. New board chair appointed to Devlin Foundation Rebuild Initiative. I clicked the PDF, scrolled. The name? Nathan Devlin. My breath caught. He wasn't running from the name. He was reframing it. The article said he'd disavowed his parents' conduct, vowed full transparency, offered complete access to financial records, established a new fund privately managed, publicly traceable. The final quote read, "Silence protected my family. Now I want it to protect those who were never heard." I closed the laptop, let it sit there, and I smiled, because healing doesn't always look like flowers. Sometimes it looks like legacy repurposed. Someone asked me once, if you could do it all again, would you? And I didn't hesitate. Yes. but I would have done it sooner, with fewer apologies, with more faith in the power of unseen people. We think we lose ourselves when we walk away, but sometimes we only find our true shape when we strip everything they handed us. The roles, the silence, the fear of being too much. I left the Devlins behind, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I took back my story. I took back my gaze. And I took back the power to walk into a room and know every wall remembered my name even if no one else dared to say it out loud. Have you ever walked away from something that defined you and realized what you found was more honest than what you left behind? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes what you leave behind is exactly what you were meant to outgrow. They thought I was finished. After the stories faded, after the reporters moved on, after the silence returned. But silence doesn't mean absence. It means something is listening. The difference now? It was listening to me. A year passed. No headlines, no voicemails, no knocks at my door. I lived in a smaller place now, fewer windows, but all of them faced the sunrise. Every morning, I'd watch the light move across the kitchen tile and think this is what peace sounds like. Not applause, not closure, just breath. And yet, echoes remained. Because when you dismantle something that powerful, what you leave behind becomes a blueprint. I received a letter last fall, torn envelope, no signature. Inside was a photo, a blurry image of a woman young, mid-20s walking through a gated estate. The caption on the back read, "She cleans their floors, but I think she sees too much." And under that just two words, "You started this." I sat at my kitchen table for an hour just holding it. Who sent it? I'll never know. But I recognized what it meant. The pattern I shattered. It had been rebuilt somewhere else. The cycle always tries to regenerate. But this time, someone was watching sooner. That's the thing they never tell you. You don't kill injustice. You just interrupt it. And if you're lucky, someone else keeps the interruption going after you've gone quiet again. A few months later, I got an email from Blanca. No greeting, no goodbye, just 4 words. "Second house is full." I smiled, because when someone builds a future that has room for others, the past doesn't get to win. Occasionally, I still walk into places where my name echoes, not loudly, but enough. A corporate office I consulted once whispered my story like a campfire myth. Don't mess with the quiet ones. They might be Evelyn Marsh. A nonprofit asked if I'd speak on employee ethics. I didn't respond, because I didn't want to become a TED Talk. I wanted to remain a consequence. People still get my story wrong. They say I was cold. They say I was calculating. Some call me brave. Some call me dangerous. But the truth is simpler. I was tired. Tired of making myself small. Tired of pretending I didn't notice the rot. Tired of being the room's shadow when I had the whole view. So I did the most dangerous thing a quiet woman can do. I remembered. And worse, I wrote it down. What happened to the Devlins? They lost everything they built in public. But privately, they built a fortress of denial. New identities, dismantled presence. A family that still pretends truth was the threat, not their own reflection. But I don't chase ghosts anymore. They can haunt themselves. And as for Nathan, I received a postcard last winter. Front, a photo of a plain building, nothing special. Back, in neat, careful handwriting, "We rebuilt it, for the right reasons this time." No name, no return address, but he didn't need one. I recognized the echo, and for the first time, I felt still. There's a park I visit sometimes, quiet, out of the way. It has a bench with no plaque, just a line carved into the wood. She didn't say much, but we heard her anyway. I don't know who carved it. Maybe someone like me. Maybe someone who used to be invisible. Either way, it's there. A quiet monument to a quiet war, fought in plain sight, and one with memory. You see, when you choose to leave instead of perform, you give up the applause, but you gain the echo, because echoes live longer than applause ever could. I've stopped explaining what I did. If they don't understand by now, they were never meant to. But when I walk down certain streets, when someone pauses mid-conversation or lowers their voice as I pass, I know they remember. They just don't want to admit what they remember, because it's easier to forget the one who made them look too close, too long, too clearly. And that's the real victory. Not that I exposed them, but that they'll never be fully comfortable again, because I made silence dangerous. And now, every quiet woman they meet might be the one who saw too much. Have you ever made someone so afraid they started whispering your name in rooms you'd never even entered? Let me know in the comments. Let me know when you'd like to turn these episodes into full video-ready scripts with scene visuals, narrator pacing, and voiceover cues. You're almost at the finish line, and the echo you've crafted is unforgettable. Because sometimes, the loudest legacy is the quiet that never lets them forget.